Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, an evolutionary biologist gets a job at sea that turns deadly very quickly. So, please listen closely as we explain Black Spots and the Norwegian Float.
A lot of people don't seem to know the difference between an evolutionary biologist and a marine biologist. Sure, there is overlap, but you can't just exchange one for the other. As an evolutionary biologist, I've tried to explain this difference to my family for years. I can sort of understand how they can get it mixed up, but when it gets to working out there, in the real world, there really is no reason why an employer would confuse the two. The terms are not interchangeable. Therefore, I was skeptical when I was first asked to be involved with the Norwegian Float project. The study was to be conducted entirely at sea, with the help of both the Icelandic and Norwegian government. The entire project was government sanctioned, and everything was official and on the books. What wasn't talked about was what the project was actually about. For a time, there was even a website, but the description was so generic that it was impossible to learn what was actually going on. Improving and understanding the life of a quickly changing ecosystem, said an important man in a fancy suit through a YouTube link on the front page. I have a saying: when something is so generic that it can be applied to everything, it doesn't mean anything. Let's take a step back. I'm a biologist, evolutionary biologist specifically. I got everything up to my postdoc from the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden, Stockholm. I've worked with a variety of colleagues from all over the world. I published a paper with a fellow scientist on environmental impacts of electromagnetism in 2015, which I highly recommend reading. When I was asked to work for the Norwegian Float back in 2017, I'd just come back from a study in Iceland. I think this was what sparked their interest in my particular field of study: adaptation and rapid temperature shifts. My specialty is working with fruit flies and stickleback fish. I had been working in the active volcanic areas of Iceland when our operation was suddenly defunded. To this day, I'm not sure why. I don't think it was a coincidence. This is when I was contacted by Norwegian Float Project, or NF for short. They asked me to be a part of a project located far out at sea. Despite me being an evolutionary biologist, again, not a marine biologist. It was weird, but I needed the work. Our entire Iceland project had been axed overnight, and I was just sitting at the hotel watching my bank account drain. I barely asked any questions. I just brought my sticklebacks and climbed aboard. Science ain't cheap. This is what I knew about NF at that point. The entire operation was set at the northern edge of the Norwegian Sea, just north of Iceland. No less than 4 science vessels were active on site, with daily check-ins from the Coast Guard. We were working in 4 teams, isolated from one another, only communicating through approved daily reports that went through what my boss called a funnel. It was a fancy way of saying all communication between teams was monitored, rewritten, and double-checked. Our vessel, the Heyerdahl, could hold a crew of about 12 people, with plenty of space to run samples. On my first day out there, I still had no idea what was going on. My colleagues, 4 Norwegian men and an Icelandic woman, tried to fill me in. It is hard for a landlubber like me to be out in the middle of the Norwegian Sea like this. The waves can reach so high that you swear you're going to capsize. Nothing feels solid, and it can take days before you reach the point where you can feel the waves in your mind before you feel them in your legs. It dips into freezing temperatures at night, and the power necessary to keep climate control running is ridiculous. I can't imagine someone willingly staying out there for a prolonged period. And yet, I signed up for 4 weeks. That was what was stated in my initial contract. We were assigned to work in pairs. I worked with the Icelandic woman, Selma. She was an actual marine biologist, and was just as surprised to see me there as I was. She had little to no idea what was going either. We had our first mission briefing 36 hours after first stepping foot on the Heyerdahl. We were sitting in this small cafeteria-sized room. Everything there is metal, and if the ship rocks too much, it all starts screeching. A man I'd never seen before had set up a projector, and our crew sat down to listen. Everyone was wearing thick jackets, caps, and gloves, but most of us were still shuddering. The man with the projector wasn't. "Do you know the term island biome?" was the first thing he asked us. Most of us nodded. An island biome is the term for an ecologic system that has been largely separated from other systems for a long period of time. Kind of like the Galapagos Islands, Darwin's finches. We've found an island biome, and we need to study it. We need experts from a wide range of areas, so I imagine things will be a bit confusing as we start. Don't be afraid to air your concerns, but please be aware that we are just as confused as you are. He fired up the projector. The image made it clear. They'd found something over 13,000 feet into the sea. A few weeks earlier, there had been a tectonic shift. The NF project had been a standby government task force between the Norwegian and Icelandic government for years, just in case they needed to put together a team at short notice. They had been expecting something like this to happen eventually. Shortly after the shift, they noticed areas of the ocean being discolored black through satellite imagery, looking for new land masses. Shortly afterwards, they found an isolated pocket far beneath the ocean surface. This pocket of the ocean, at about 14,000 feet, has been isolated for millions of years. Now it was released into the ocean. An isolated island biome is suddenly introduced to the Norwegian Sea. The reason for the ocean to turn black in the area was nothing short of microbes. Imagine the number of microbes necessary to color the ocean for several square miles. We were shown a series of images. Thick slabs of goo, almost like oil, slapping against the hull of the Heyerdahl. The man with the projector told us we would be allowed to study this in person, and that samples were already being provided. Further samples would be gathered at the request of the team. The implications of this were unfathomable. What kind of life forms have evolved to survive at those crushing depths? I'm not gonna lie, I was excited to get started. So were my colleagues. We were issued some standard safety equipment and briefed on basic protocols. The project was fairly secret as to avoid potentially damaging traffic. We had to surrender our personal cell phones to 2 men armed with pistols. That first night, we were given some initial samples. My colleagues were ecstatic, and most of the night we were up throwing around names for new species. At least 13 unknown kinds were identified, just that first night. We were surprised to see that most of the microbes were fungi, as opposed to the expected algae. Mushrooms at the bottom of the sea, who would have known? The first few days was amazing. Our reports were smoothly rolling between our 4 teams, and we'd identified at least 37 different types of fungi in the waters. By this time, we were getting ready to send down deep-sea cameras and diving teams. We were still pretty excited about the entire event, and even the armed guards didn't seem so frightening to us. They were good guys just trying to do their job, after all. They had no reason to be unpleasant. We all ate together in the cafeteria every day. Lots of salted fish and crisp bread, as per Scandinavian tradition. My favorite guard, Hellman, made amazing mayonnaise and tuna sandwiches for us. At the end of the first week, we were getting some strange reports. Most of the fungus we'd been testing had a mineral in common that we were unable to identify. We tried to extract it, and in a few days, we had 3 grams of a completely unknown metal sitting in our lab. Our boss was beyond excited. The third team had a geologist who was unable to even take a guess at what kind of metal we were looking at. It was almost like a crystalline structure, but more similar to lead. We were promised an expert would look into it in a couple of days. We still had our heads spinning with daily discoveries. We even discovered larger life forms like fish. Still, they were smaller than the nail on your pinky finger, but they were actual complex life forms, completely black, pellet-shaped, and eyeless. These fish, just as the fungus, had large traces of the unknown metal embedded in their scales. Our superiors gave it the name of blameless metal, feilfri in Norwegian, claiming with a shrug that it was as good a name as any. After all, it wasn't the metal's fault that it had surfaced. It was blameless, see? We found it kind of funny. You have to remember, we thought we were standing at the edge of the discovery of a century. We had a pretty bright headspace at the time. After 2 weeks, we were all pretty used to working on the higher doll. We all knew each other by name, and we had strict routines that we followed. The expert had arrived and was working with Team 2, but initial tests were inconclusive. The only thing we knew for sure was that the Blameless was a previously undiscovered kind of metal that most of the life forms had evolved to gain nourishment from. Selma and I were working on testing the effects of the fungus environment on my spickleback fish. The other teams were using divers to gain less pressure-damaged samples. There was also a deep-sea camera being set up, but we were having trouble finding relevant data. Every day, the microbes were diluted, and the massive amounts of moving water would start to drift us further and further away from the point of origin. Soon, we were split up into 2 teams with 2 vessels each, those following the microbe migration down the current, and those of us who stayed at the origin site. Selma theorized that a particular set of fungus was formed by how deep the isolation biome stretched, as the fungus closer to the ceiling of the bubble was smaller than the larger fungus that lived deeper down. Essentially, it allowed us to gain a sense of how large the pocket really was. Selma ballparked that it was about 2,000 to 2,500 meters in depth, depending on size variation. Still, the crown of our discovery was, by far, the unidentified metal. At the start of my 4th week, I started to see a troubling change in my spicklebacks. I noticed there were fewer of them, and that the water was growing darker despite having a functioning filter. Their behavior changed. They would start swimming in circular patterns around one of the larger females, who would eat them alive. She grew to be more than 3 times the size of the other spicklebacks, and in 2 days, she was the only living fish left in the tank. The dark color of the aquarium came from rapidly multiplying fungus. A lack of pressure didn't seem to be an issue. I reported this to our superiors and asked to do further testing on how fast this fungus could spread, and whether it was a vast difference when treated with fresh salt or brackish water. Selma agreed that it was important, and she was starting to grow worried. However, it was made clear that our main focus should be the metal. Apparently, Team 2 had found that it was extremely reflective. They had managed to gather enough to make a small cube of it, and the thing reflected so much light that it could damage your eyes during prolonged contact. It could also gain enough heat to start a small fire. It was extremely conductive, far surpassing gold and copper. With this potential game changer at hand, my spicklebacks weren't the focus of the Norwegian government anymore. Selma, on the other hand, was anxious. While she took on the responsibility of doing whatever tests management asked us to, I was free to keep experimenting on the spicklebacks and their reaction to the fungus. One morning, when I got to the lab, week 5, the big spickleback female, dubbed Kruger by my team, was nowhere to be seen. The lid of the small aquarium had been pushed aside, and a black slime trail had been left on the floor. I found Kroger wiggling halfway across the room, straight towards my other spicklebacks in the control tank. We decided enough was enough and killed it. That's when we discovered a few troubling features during the autopsy. Kroger had lost both her eyes, and the bones had deteriorated to a sort of black mush. The entire physiology of the fish was getting replaced by something jelly-like. The concentration of the metal was higher, especially in the brain. Selma flagged in her report that we needed to take increased security measures, and that the fungus could be dangerous when inhaled. Management didn't listen, but we started wearing gas masks from that point on. Many of my colleagues followed suit voluntarily. This was only the start of our troubles. The diving teams reported getting burns, as if stung by jellyfish, straight through their diving suits. We were told about long, lightning-like burns on their torsos, arms, and thighs. One of them had apparently been so harshly burned that they had gone into anaphylactic shock. They had to be immediately returned to the surface, risking decompression sickness. We were not told about this in any of the reports, but by the guards who we'd gotten to know by now. Hellman was just as worried as we were. But everything went to shit when, by week 6, it started raining. It was a cold morning in early April when the rains came. It was immediately obvious that something wasn't right. The water drops were thick and almost the size of golf balls. Some of them fell so hard and fast that there were cracks in the glass of the main bridge. We were ordered inside, but Selma managed to get a few samples. The management was duct taping towels to the glass, trying to cover it up. It was the same fungus that we'd studied, but slightly refined. The fungus had tagged along the evaporating ocean water and become a part of the rain formation cycle. This happens to some degree in nature all the time, but I'd never seen anything like it. It was far too aggressive. The clouds were solid black. Drops weren't just falling, they were dripping, forming a pour-like texture on the black clouds. The sky looked like a big hairy creature, with drops falling from hair-like tendrils. For a moment, it felt like the end of the world. Nothing has ever made me felt so small, so insignificant. The guards were having trouble getting their uniforms off. The droplets were so thick, quickly hardened, turning it into a slime-like substance. Niels, one of my colleagues, were starting to complain about a stinging, salt-like sensation in his eyes. Thinking back on what happened to Kruger, I was getting a bad feeling. It all went to hell quickly. Niels locked himself in the bathroom, vomiting. One of the guards, Hellman, stripped naked and started scratching his skin with an army knife. Selma and I tried to get into our safety equipment, but there was no time. 3 of our colleagues got there first, and one of the guards started waving his pistol around. Things were about to go bad, so we just stepped out. We wrapped ourselves in ponchos and hurried up on deck. The drops were so big that I was struck to the ground. Selma helped me up, a bit stepped away as she saw my hands covered in black. Trying to walk on the upper decks was like sliding back and forth in wet mud. We also noticed the boat wasn't rocking as much as usual. The ocean surface had turned a bit more solid. We got to the main bridge, but were locked out. They refused to let us in, and when we were being insistent, they started threatening us. They assured us they would use force to keep us out if necessary. We abandoned the idea and ran to the rescue boats, pulled the plastic tarp over us, and tried to wait it all out. After a few hours, the clouds covered the sky. It was barely 11 a.m., and it was completely black outside. Selma and I stayed quiet, hearing the thick smatter of droplets on the plastic tarp. We could hear screams coming from the main deck. Selma peeked out at one point, but quickly looked away. "There's something in the water," she whispered. I peeked out, but could only catch a glimpse before Selma pulled me away. There were thousands of them. Endless fairy lights, just beneath the mucus surface of the ocean. I'm sure it was the reflective metal reacting to our warning lights, bouncing off of thousands of life forms. By 1 p.m., we heard gunshots. We hid under the tarp, but could hear the scene playing out. Someone was running out on the main deck, followed by at least 6 other people. While Selma was looking away, I peeked out. I could see Hellman standing at the front of the main deck. He was naked and bleeding, holding a gun out towards 5 of our colleagues. In the front was Niels. His face turned completely black. I couldn't see his eyes. "Stay back!" Hellman screamed. "Get back inside!" They didn't stay back. Instead, they reached for him, groaning. "Kill me!" they begged. "Eat me!" As they grabbed Hellman, he started firing blindly. I covered my head and ears, just waiting for it all to be over. For at least half an hour, there were guttural screams, people begging, pleading, screaming for Hellman to kill them and eat them. People crying, screaming, and trying to force themselves into his mouth. What worries me is what I heard at the end, before things went quiet. They were no longer begging and crying. They were thanking him, then nothing. A few hours passed. We could hear helicopters, and the drops stopped falling on our tarp. You have no idea how loud a helicopter really is until you're standing right below one. They're deafening. Selma and I were given blindfolds and carried out to a nearby Coast Guard boat. People were screaming in Icelandic, but I could barely hear it over the helicopters. As we were getting further and further away from the site, I slowly realized that Selma and I had been separated. I'd had my blindfold on for close to 8 hours when I was pushed into a decontamination room. My clothes were cut off with scissors, and I was sprayed with freezing water and antiseptics. I could have sworn it was pure chlorine. They shaved my head. They took blood tests, and I was forced to blow through some kind of a tube, like a sobriety test. They also tapped my teeth with some sort of tiny hammer. I was in quarantine for a week. It wasn't bad, just a small room and no human contact. No internet, but pretty much anything I could ask for otherwise. I spent that week reading and writing down my thoughts. Pretty much everything I wrote down was confiscated by the end of the week, and I was forced to sign an agreement not to talk about it. I'm thinking, to hell with it. What the hell is Iceland gonna do about it? I've been completely disconnected from the Norwegian float project since, but it is still up and running. I've read reports about black spots appearing along the ocean current, and I suspect the fungus is migrating. The northern coast of Iceland was briefly evacuated following the resurgence of one of these black spots, but they claimed it was for seismologic reasons. Bullshit. Didn't see any papers mentioning the apparent mass suicide. That's why I'm on Reddit. This is where I get the real information. I've seen videos of people freaking out the same way the crew of the Heyerdahl did, begging to be killed and eaten. This seems to be a recurring pattern, and I've seen it triggered in all manner of strange ways. The weirdest thing I've seen was some sort of video game triggering the same effect in people. Also, one of my old colleagues seems to have worked on something that seems eerily familiar to the blameless metal we found. Small world, isn't it? It's the same person I worked on my article about electromagnetism back in 2015. I think the NF project has tried to contain this thing. There was a period when there were barely any black spots at all during most of 2018 to 2019. But all of a sudden, they just started popping up out of nowhere. They're still out there. You can find them on Google Maps even. See for yourself. The biggest I've seen is at 54.7167347723166 minus 22.2749 413-313-1312. It wasn't just Brexit that screwed with commercial fishing in the UK. Let's leave it at that. It started off the coast of Norway and Iceland, but there are black spots appearing as far away as Ireland and the UK. By my predictions and following the migration patterns, the next few spots will start to appear outside the coast of Newfoundland and the Gulf of St. Lawrence in late 2021. Just as an example, I'll show you a satellite image I found from last September. Please keep in mind that this was just south of the coast of Greenland. It is not far away from the US mainland by now. Image. I don't even want to think about what the Kroger human will look like, but from my calculations it could be a monstrosity as tall as 20 feet. That's just a rough estimate based on the little time I had to study these things. Look for the black spots, look for the symptoms. They make you beg and squirm. They make you want to be eaten.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a recently divorced man moves into a new place when his neighbors start to bug him. So it might be true that freaks come out at night, because my neighbors are nesting.
I'm not a conspiracy nut. I don't believe the moon landing was fake, or that there's a secret world government run by lizards. I'm a sane, rational human being. With that said, I'm convinced my neighbor is building some sort of nest. I'm not joking. Let me explain. I got divorced about a year ago and had to move to a new place on short notice. I got a pretty decent 2-room apartment on the 3rd floor of an old apartment building. The place was probably built in the 50s, but I couldn't get a cleaner or cheaper apartment that isn't out of my price range. I moved in and tried to pick up the pieces of my life. At least my wife took all the heavy and expensive boxes in the divorce settlement. I only saw my neighbors in passing. There are 2 apartments per floor, and 5 floors in total. I live on the 3rd floor, and straight across from me is a retired elderly woman. She lives with 2 cats, and has a younger man visiting about once a week, probably her son. The 2 apartments below me aren't that interesting. A childless couple, and straight across from them, 3 college students. No big deal. The apartment straight above me was probably the most important one. That's the one you gotta look out for when moving to a new place. If anything is gonna disturb you, that'll be the one. You don't want them to be clog dancing enthusiasts, manic cleaners, or the kind of idiot who listens to music with loud speakers on the bus. The guy who lived above me, Hugo, was an ideal neighbor. He was some kind of accountant who worked at the sanitation department. He kept to himself, never moved a single piece of furniture, and didn't move around much. No slamming doors, no running. He was pretty big, body-wise, with a sizable pair of glasses and thinning hairline. He lived alone, seemed friendly, and he was simply the best neighbor I'd ever had. God bless that silent, chunky angel. So, let's talk about the nesting. It started a few months ago, in December. It was at the height of the 2020 pandemic, so I was trying to get some minor Christmas shopping done in the off hours of the day. I have flexible work hours, and I can work from home, so I can go out whenever I need to. I was getting a photo printed for my mom and was trying to find a fitting frame. I found this small store with a going out of business sale, and I noticed Hugo browsing some silverware further in. Only he wasn't alone. Christ, I'm having a hard time describing this woman. She was half his weight, an entire head taller, and she wasn't even wearing heels. Neck like a swan, thin shoulders, and gorgeous nutmeg hair. She had a peculiar smell, like a mix of a bittersweet flower and honey. Pale, flawless skin, red nails. I couldn't stop staring at her. Hugo told her something funny, and her laugh seemed to light up the entire room. She grabbed his arm, kissed his cheek, and whispered something back to him. He smiled. I'd never seen him smile before. I saw them buy plates, silverware, and a few blankets. Nothing special. She paid for the whole thing and carried it all out in a tote bag. Hugo just hung to her every word, but they both seemed to genuinely care for one another. It didn't make sense to me. They were basically different species of people. Over the coming days, I noticed some changes. I could sometimes hear laughter coming from the stairwell, and I could hear furniture being moved around during the day. Hugo got himself a new car, one of those large six-seaters. They were drilling and hammering a few times a week, and at 2 occasions, I noticed Hugo and his girlfriend carrying large carpets up the stairs. He seemed so happy. I don't want to sound like a stalker, but I was curious about the two of them. I noticed they'd changed the names on the door. That's how I learned her name. Sandra. After going through a painful divorce, I'll be the first to admit I was jealous. Sandra was gorgeous, and it didn't make sense for her to be with a guy like Hugo. I was spending weeks on end in lockdown, alone, hearing laughter coming through the ceiling. Yeah, it made me bitter. Sue me. Then her family moved in. Hugo helped carry a lot of heavy boxes up those stairs, and I caught a glimpse of the whole crew through my back window. Sandra had 2 younger sisters, both just old enough to start high school. Then there was her dad, who looked to be in his early 60s. The whole lot of them were beautiful. Everyone smiling, eager to help. Healthy, happy, well-dressed. You could fall in love with either one of them with just a picture. It was weird for so many of them to move into such a small apartment, but I'd seen Stranger Things. I figured it was a temporary thing, but I changed my mind once I saw them moving vans. Yes, that's vans plural. 3 vans full of boxes, not a single piece of furniture. Hugo looked exhausted carrying those heavy boxes up and down several flights of stairs. Sandra didn't seem bothered at all. I know, looking at them like that was creepy. I was painfully single and, most of all, bored. As December turned to January, the whole family had settled in quite well. They were still decent neighbors. The hammering and drilling stopped early on, and at most I would just hear them laughing at something or watching TV. Hugo would leave for work every day, and he'd always leave with a smile. He lost a lot of weight, and he'd gotten himself both contact lenses and fitting clothes. He looked good, not compared to Sandra, but still. He was getting there. I ran into him in the stairwell once, when I was throwing out some trash. He was just coming back from a jog, chugging some kind of sports drink. Hell, he was in better shape than I was. He smiled. Hey, you're in 3B, right? He asked. Sure am. And you're 4B. That's right, he smiled. Look, if we ever get a bit too noisy, let me know, all right? Sure, I nodded. It's fine, really. No bother. You guys holding out okay? Yeah, great, actually. My fiance got the bug early, so she's got the antibodies. The rest of us just have to wait for the needle. No doubt. We smiled at one another and went our separate ways. Just a few steps later, I had to stop myself. I was too curious. Hey, I gotta ask. How do you guys all live together in that small space? Doesn't it get crowded? Always room for family? Hugo smiled and finished his drink. No room too small, no problem too big. That was the last time I saw him. I stopped seeing him go to work. His car stayed put in the parking lot all day. I'd see Sandra around town alone, her sisters as well. I noticed her dad throwing out some trash every now and then, but that was it. Hugo just wasn't around anymore. I didn't think too hard about it at first. But in early March, I realized I hadn't seen him in over a month. His name was still on their door, though. Him and Sandra. This is when I started to get a bad vibe. I started to make a habit out of taking notes of things that seemed weird or out of place with Sandra and her family. Like they're trash bags. They're not just trash bags. They're this big blue mesh-type bags that are heat-sealed at the top. Looks like something you'd use to throw out biohazardous waste from a hospital. They were round and packed to the brim like beach balls. Then there were the nightly excursions. Once the sun started to set, all the sisters would take Hugo's car and go for a ride. They'd only be gone for a few hours, but they did it consistently for at least 4 days every week, mostly on the weekends. But the weirdest thing started in mid-March. For some time, their dad had been throwing out more trash than usual, sometimes several times a day. And at night, I'd hear these weird noises. It sounded like a mix of an engine and a nature documentary. This low, constant droning noise. I tried recording it in my bathroom, where the sound was clearest, but it doesn't sound like much. You can check it for yourself here if you want. I'd hear that noise at least once a day, sometimes for an hour or two. It wasn't loud, but it is such an unusual sound that you can't help but to listen. Things escalated gradually. Sometimes I'd watch them come back from their drive with duffel bags full of something. At one point, they just had armfuls of branches and firewood. I made notes of all of it, complete with time and date. I was a bit obsessed. I even got out in the middle of the night to check one of their big blue trash bags. I poked one open and felt this intense dirt smell. The bag was just full of some kind of white ceramic and broken glass. I took a piece of the white stuff back home just to get a closer look. At this point, I still thought they were just weird people who'd done something to Hugo. I was still trying to piece it all together. That's the literal thought that made me realize this was something else entirely. To piece something together. I gathered the rest of the white ceramics from the bag and pieced it together. Super glue. An egg. An actual egg. Large as a football. This was the remaining shell. I didn't know what to think. I just hid it. All of a sudden I started seeing that family in a whole new light. Branches, boxes, bags, full of something smelling of dirt. In my notebook, I just made a single entry. They're nesting. At this point, it was the beginning of April, and my job was opening up to having people coming back into work. We were forced to come in at least twice a week to note our hours and report to our supervisor. I didn't mind getting out of the apartment for a while, even if I had to wear a mask and keep a lot of distance. It was fine. Once, when I was coming home, I noticed my front door open. The old lady across from me was standing in the hallway, holding one of her cats. Something was going on, and the neighbors were antsy. Just as I was about to enter, Sandra stepped out of my apartment. She fixed her brilliant smile on me, that creepy, gorgeous smile. "We heard noises," she said. "The door was open and your fire alarm was going crazy." Is there... "It's fine," she said. "The super opened it up to see if there was a fire." I walked up to her and she stepped aside. I gave her a long, questioning look. "Fire alarms don't just start by themselves," I said. "Where's the super?" "He got a call," said the lady across the hall. "He looked upset." "He did?" nodded Sandra. "Sounded serious." "I'm sorry if you were all worried," I said, "but please respect my privacy. You can't just go in." "I was just waiting for the super to get back. He forgot to lock your door." "Well, now I'm here, and I can lock it just fine. Thank you." I closed the door, locked it, and looked over my apartment. My notes were gone. The eggshells were gone. My computer had a hard drive malfunction, and there were screws missing from the chassis. Now they knew. The sisters started noticing me more and more. They waved at me every time they took their nightly drive. Their dad gave me a cold look every time he threw out the trash, now in regular non-blue bags. The sounds at night stopped, and I never saw them carry anything inside. I was sure they just switched up their schedule, but I wasn't sure. I'd run into them more frequently in person. They'd accidentally meet me in the stairwell every time I went outside. Sandra was always polite, but that smile was hiding something. I felt it. Then there was water damage in the ceiling of my bedroom. Something foul smelled. There was something heavy up there, and the ceiling had started to bulge. I called the supervisor about it, but some man kept telling me that I had to have the papers for an insurance claim before they could fix it. It was bullshit, and they were stalling for time. I think they were trying to cover the fact that the super hadn't been in for at least a month. I'm not stupid. I knew the super didn't have an assistant. The thing is, I hadn't really been paying attention to my other neighbors, the couple downstairs and the college roommates. They moved out a month earlier. I didn't even think about it. Now I had 8 new neighbors, and they were all very, very pretty. 6 women, 2 men, all in their early 20s and drop-dead gorgeous. The entire apartment complex was full of them now. That weird sound I used to hear seemed to come from every direction at night. They were not even hiding it anymore. They were just carrying all kinds of weird trash up to their apartments. Branches, firewood, plastic, bag after bag of fertilizer, and planting dirt. Last week, there were more moving vans coming. Everyone was going outside to help our new, beautiful neighbors carry their stuff inside. I felt trapped in my own apartment and decided once and for all to just leave. Once I stepped into the stairwell, I noticed 8 of them looking at me from all over. They were on the floors above, below, even straight across. Yeah, seems the old lady with the cats moved out as well. Then they screamed. They all just screamed in unison. They were like animals trying to scare away a predator. I could hear boxes dropping and footsteps approaching. I panicked. I glanced at them and burst into a sprint. There were open mouths screaming, feet running, eyes large and dark, like cats getting ready to pounce on a mouse. I took the fire escape out the back, ran, twisted my ankle, and got in my car. I just drove. Something pounded on my back windshield, but I got away. And now I'm here, posting about it. I'm not sure I should look into this. I just want to get as far away as possible. I don't think I'm safe yet. I'm staying with my brother, and just the other day he told me there was a beautiful young woman asking for me while I was at the grocery store. Reddit, I don't know what this is or what they're doing. All I know is that they're nesting and people are going missing. God, I can't get that noise out of my head, that scream, those faces.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man's aunt passes away and leave him items that's wanted by more than just collectors. So, what item is passed down in your family? Because mine's is the Soundless Lady.
My Aunt Rachel practically raised me. After a lengthy battle with a terminal illness, she passed last year, leaving what little she had left after the hospital bills were paid. I was to take care of her cockatiel parrot, Tugboat, and her collection of 50s cartoon-themed collective plates. Basically, the only 2 items that couldn't be easily sold at an auction. If you saw the plates, you'd see why. Downright creepy things. One in particular, a plate portraying a young cartoon girl feeding apples to a giant frog. It's like the whole thing was made by 2 different people. The girl looked positively Disney, while the frog was more, uncomfortably realistic. It was such an odd item that there had to be a collector looking for it somewhere. I was sure of it. Yet for weeks, I couldn't find anyone even remotely interested. I posted pictures of the plate on pretty much every social media account I had, along with a few auction sites. But there were no takers. There were no markings or stamps indicating year or brand, unlike the other plates. And I was starting to think it was custom made. I couldn't stand looking at it. So I put it in a box in the garage. The others went up on my kitchen wall. My aunt would have wanted it that way. I live in a house not too far from the lake, on the outskirts of a small Minnesota town. There are a few houses in the nearby area, but I couldn't even hit the closest neighbor's yard with a rock if I tried. There's only a single streetlight that works outside, and that thing is flimsier than our summer weather. I rarely have any visitors, as this place can be a bit too out of the way even for my friends to come by. I inherited this place from my mom, and who passed away when I was younger. I'm one of the lucky house owners of my generation, but at what cost? My aunt's bird, Tugboat, fit right in. It was easy for me to fix him a big cage in one of the back rooms. When you're living on your own in a place like this, you got more space than you know what to do with. My aunt's funeral was simple. She'd insisted she paid for it herself, so it had to be as basic and cheap as could be. She hated the thought of ever being a burden, and she practically begged me to take care of Tugboat. You don't say no to that. You just don't. Besides, that bird was damn near the only thing that kept me sane through the COVID pandemic. Having lived in an empty house, you learn to identify most sounds around the property. The hum of the fuse box, the buzzing kitchen lights, the noise from the fridge against the backdrop of a TV that's been on way too long without anyone watching. This was the only reason I ever really took notice, that one night when this all started. I was turning on my electric toothbrush one night, only to notice it was completely silent. The motor was running, I felt the vibrations, and I saw it spin, but there was no sound. Not a peep. Yet, I could still hear the TV in the other room just fine. Over the next few days, there were several of these odd instances. Once, the egg timer went off but didn't make a sound, causing me to overboil my breakfast. I thought the ventilation was broken once, but it turned out to have just gone quiet. Hell, at one point I dropped one of my aunt's collective plates. It shattered against the ceramic tiles, yet didn't make any noise. I was starting to think I was going deaf, but the 2 doctors I spoke to confirmed my hearing was just fine. Still, the mental image of seeing that falling plate and expecting a loud crash, only for it to remain silent, there was something eerie to it. A friend of mine, Patrick, works for the sheriff's department. We usually had lunch once a week to catch up, but that tradition teetered off during the pandemic. This time, I met him at the supermarket, but barely even noticed him. I had been having trouble sleeping and getting to work on time, as my alarm clock sometimes stayed silent for no apparent reason. My boss wasn't too happy, so I had to start using a vibration alarm. Patrick elbow bumped me by the fruit aisle, snapping me out of my thoughts. "Hey there," he said, grabbing a handful of oranges. "You doing okay?" "Yeah, sorry, I didn't see you there." "These are crazy times," he said. "I heard about Rachel. I'm sorry I couldn't make the funeral." "That's okay," I nodded. She never was much for men in uniform. Patrick laughed. We went our separate ways and finished our shopping, only to meet in the parking lot outside. We'd managed to park next to each other without even realizing it. He leaned against the hood of his car. "Hey, have you seen any strangers around? After this year, you all seem like strangers." "You know what I mean," he chuckled. "Strangers, passers-by." "No, sorry, I don't get out much. Some of your neighbors have had problems. Be careful." "Problems?" He looked at me like a deer in headlights. "You don't know?" Apparently, there'd been reports of a thief. First, they thought it was raccoons, as someone had gone through the trash cans. But raccoons don't try to pick locks. They also don't leave food behind, or human-sized handprints on the windows. Some people had reported seeing a woman with tangled hair roam about, but the police hadn't managed to find her. This is what made me start looking more closely at my own property. I had noticed the garbage can lid gone missing, but I hadn't given it much thought. Also, I could have sworn there were handprints on my car one dewy morning. I tried to tell myself that it was all paranoia, but after what Patrick said, it seemed that everything was a clue, or a warning. In my mind, the strange woman was lurking behind every corner. I tried to put it out of my mind. One night, as I heard Tugboat sing his interpretation of Earth, Wind and Fire's September, I took an extra long shower. As I was scrubbing my hair clean, my head went quiet. I could feel the water touching my skin, but it made no sound. Through the door, I could still hear the bird sing his heart out. You'd be surprised how cold, warm water can feel when you've got ice in your veins. I rinsed off most of the shampoo and stepped out. There's a small frosted glass window in my bathroom. The silhouette of a pale face was pressed against it. I screamed, but no sound came out. Tugboat kept singing in the other room, unaware. I grabbed my robe and ran into the kitchen to call Patrick, but I couldn't hear anyone pick up on the other end of the line. I couldn't hear my own words when I spoke. And there, just outside the kitchen window, was the silhouette of an intruder trying to find their way in. A pair of unevenly sized eyes stared at me, slightly too far apart. As our eyes met, she bolted, probably heading for the back door. I picked up my keychain. Tugboat stopped singing from the other room, as he sensed something was wrong. As my hearing returned, I could hear the comforting sound of sharp metal from my kitchen knife as I pulled it from a drawer. My pulse was running away from me. It is one thing to think of a home invasion, but to live it violates every thought of privacy and safety you have. It was turning real fast. There was a large sliding glass door leading out to the backyard, and I figured if there ever came an intruder, it'd be through there. The same room where Tugboat chirped away, but now he'd gone quiet. I ran in there, still fresh out of the shower, my knife held in a cramped, forced grip. I almost convinced myself that I was ready to use it. There she was, just outside the door, pale, with unkempt hair, eyes of different sizes, slightly too far apart, dressed in what looked like a hospital gown. She was malnourished and frail, but something told me she had the strength of a madwoman. Her eyes darted back and forth, searching for something. As they landed on me, she opened her wide mouth to scream. Not a sound came out. As her mouth grew to an unnatural size, I could feel vibrations in the air, like standing next to a concert loudspeaker. The sliding glass door shattered, the shards fanning out towards me. The knife in my hand started shaking, but I managed to hold it. She stepped inside, her bare feet smearing ribbons of blood on the hardwood floor. She was coming for me, a constant vibration from an unnatural scream, tearing through my body. I had to try to call for help, and sprinted back into the kitchen. The light bulbs burst overhead, turning the room black. Still, not a single noise. A stray light from the streets outside made its way through the kitchen window, making the room drip with long, pale shadows. My aunt's collective plates rattled on the wall. Glasses along the kitchen sink were cracking and breaking. Empty bottles spilled onto the floor. Cabinet doors shaking back and forth, opening seemingly at random. An old recipe book fell from a countertop, the pages flicking back and forth. I pressed myself against the kitchen window, fumbling to get it open. She'd cornered me. Her mouth was wide open in that impossible scream, her body vibrating with machine-like intensity. The tangled hair twisting and stretching, as if thrown about in a storm of its own. Her uneven eyes searched for me, twitching like insects. And still, she didn't make a single sound. There were no humming fans, no buzzing electricity, only a soft breeze outside the window. I couldn't even hear my heartbeat. I managed to stumble out of the kitchen window, stepping onto the sharp gravel path. I still held onto my knife like a comfort blanket. I didn't even bother to see if she followed me, I just ran. There was no time to get in the car. I ran into the woods, following a trail that would lead me to my neighbor. Soon, the rhythmic beat of my feet went quiet, my breath too. I tried to scream for help, but the sound was swallowed. She was right behind me. Long nails reached for me, fingertips touching the edge of my robe. And all around me, nothing but tranquil nature, unbothered by my terror. I was knocked to the ground, scraping my legs against the undergrowth. I slashed with my knife, trying to fight her, as a dainty hand picked up my keys from the side pocket of my robe. I rolled away, only to see the mess of tangled hair walk away. Her uneven eyes gave me a last look as she turned her back to me. She looked right through me without a care in the world. I got to my neighbor. My dirty feet muddied their floor, and by the time the police came, it felt like a waking nightmare. I made my statement, showered for the second time that night, and slept at a nearby motel as the police cleared my house. The next day, I assessed the damage. The house had been searched thoroughly, but nothing was stolen. Not too much was broken either. Seems she was looking for something specific, not trying to steal any valuables. The police were just as dumbfounded as I was, and I didn't report anything stolen. My insurance company would need an explanation. It was hard to explain why it looked like the house had been hit by a tornado from the inside without sounding insane. All the collective plates laid shattered on the floor. Poor Tugboat was so traumatized, he's since stopped singing. Going through the damages was heartbreaking, but it made me take notice of something peculiar. The garage had been searched as well. It was pretty much fine though, at least compared to the house. Among my boxes, I noticed a single item missing. The creepy plate I'd put aside for my aunt. The only one I didn't want in the house. The one with the young cartoon girl feeding the giant frog it was gone. Yeah, I guess I found the single collector who wanted it.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man plays a game that he regrets he ever downloaded. So, by any means necessary, don't play Hatchet Man Cove.
At first, I wrote this entire post as a way to get people to uninstall and remove the game Hatchet Man Cove from their Steam accounts, but I soon realized pretty much no one has ever played it. But if you by any chance happen to own a copy, please, I urge you, remove it. Uninstall and forget it. Don't look back. Don't touch it ever again. I'll tell you why. A friend of mine bought a 3-pack of Hatchet Man Cove back in 2009. It was a multiplayer game where 3 people are paired up against a single strong player on the opposite team. Kind of like an early Dead by Daylight game. This game might very well be a spiritual predecessor. The similarities between those games are pretty eerie. I'm sure at least one person on the Dead by Daylight team has a Steam copy of Hatchet Man Cove, and that kind of worries me. See, Hatchet Man Cove was this game where you played in cycles, kind of like a red light, green light game. 3 people play as survivors from a ship that crashed into the cove, and a 4th player gets to play as the killer. The killer wasn't necessarily some slasher with an axe. It could be a vengeful angel, a grim reaper, or several other kinds of killer. At least that was the original plan. So the game would alter between having bright lights all over the map going on and off. While they were on, the killer would notice any kind of movement with a pane. When the lights were off, survivors could move any way they want as long as they didn't draw too much attention. They could set up traps to delay the killer or sabotage the lights to get more time. The killer, on the other hand, was to grab the survivors and drown them in a well at the center of the map. Once a survivor was grabbed, the other survivors are given a choice to either try and intercept the killer using traps or use the time to gain an advantage. The problem was that Hatchet Man Cove didn't sell very well. The developers had some legal trouble with their publisher, who were pissed about the developers backing out of an exclusive deal with OnLive. Check it, it's on Wikipedia. There was no promotion on Steam or anywhere else, as the publishers didn't want it released on another platform. They didn't want it released at all for another 6 months until the game had the proper infrastructure. The devs screwed up and published it on Steam anyway, and the whole thing was a mess. Still, during the months that it was active, there was a fairly regular player base. My friends and I played it pretty much every day for about a month. I mained Sturgis as a survivor, the Norwegian fisherman who could lure the killer using his fishing rod. As a killer, there were only 2 options at the time: the Hatchetman and the Blameless. I preferred to play the Hatchetman. He was straightforward. You got a hatchet, could destroy shelters, and had a certain resistance to traps. The Blameless, she was just weird. They never managed to balance her right. The Blameless was an old woman. She was slow, but she floated around the map and avoided all ground-based traps. She always had this warm smile, and her passive ability was just the weirdest. If she was far away, she would look like a random ally on your team. Only when she got closer would she reveal that sinister, smiling face. Hatchet Man was just a murderer, but the Blameless was downright creepy. But the game didn't get any updates because of the legal battle. No updates, no new survivors, no killers, nothing. Instead, the game went silent. We stopped playing, and a few months later, the game was unceremoniously unlisted and removed from the Steam store, without as much as an apology. I uninstalled Hatchet Man Cove and didn't think about it for years. Just one of those games that rest in the back catalog. I forgot I even had it. But this is where things get weird. Last December, I was gifted the new Harvest Moon game as a Christmas present, and some primal part of my reptile brain clicked back in on Hatchet Man Cove. The friends I used to play with had moved on with their lives, but the game still had a Steam community page. I checked the store page, and it was empty. The game couldn't be found on Google either. The game was completely hidden. If you don't actually have it in your library, you won't find it without a direct link. That in itself is kind of weird. Most abandoned games can still be Googled, but Hatchet Man Cove still had a very, very active community. There were plenty of discussions on the forums, but they didn't make any sense. Their speech was almost garbled. I'm sure whatever they discussed made sense to them, but to an outsider, it seemed like nonsense. A few examples. Topic. How much GW to finish no min? I want to finish no min, I don't know yet. Just don't GW then. Get your shit together. You'll never go min if you don't GW, just commit. The discussion forum is just a mess. The example above was the most legible thing I could find, and I still have no idea what it says. So I started checking out the community content like videos and screenshots. The way the community played the game was completely different from when I played. Pretty much no one played Hatchetman anymore. The killer seemed limited to the Blameless. Not a single screenshot of the Hatchetman, just the Blameless. But the weirdest thing was how players interacted with the killer. Instead of hiding, they come running up to her. They run up to her with their microphones on, screaming at her. Screaming, begging, pleading for her to kill them. Not with funny voices or anything, no. There were people crying in chat. Videos marked with GW, and various dates littered the community page, each with people crying and screaming and begging to die. The volume maxed out immediately, and most of the time, all voices were nothing but a crackling mess that could easily blow out your speakers. I couldn't stop watching. I'd never seen anything like it, not even back in the days when I was still playing. That wasn't the way you played the game. No one was hiding or looking for objectives. I'd see players using my old main Sturgis and just rush the Blameless as soon as the match started. Seeing the 3D model of the old bearded man running up to the Blameless, pleading to die, that was uncomfortable. I made the mistake of posting my own question on the discussion forum. I was just too curious. You have to remember, at this point, this was still just a weird blip in my Steam library. I made my own topic and just asked, what the hell happened to the game? I got no responses in a week. Nothing. After that, things have gotten weird. Real weird. It started with CSGO. One night, a teammate came on and just started screaming. No big deal at first, just another troll, but he was screaming at me, specifically. Screaming at me, begging me to shoot him. There was crime. He was desperate, asking me to please team kill him. He offered to send me money, trade rare skins, whatever I wanted. He got kicked before I even knew what to say. 2 games later, the same guy joins my team with a different username and clan tag. He keeps screaming, crying, and begging. My teammates laughed, but I was getting uncomfortable. I stopped playing. Hearing a grown man barely being able to breathe between sobs is just too much. That wasn't a prank, that was desperation. But it didn't stop there. From that point on, in several games, people started joining and begging me to kill them. It could be by text, in Steam, chat, by voice, whatever they could. Once in Fall Guys, there were 2 people with the usernames Kill Me and Kill Me Too. How? You can't even pick your own username in Fall Guys. They just stood there, waiting for me to push them over the edge. These colorful little blob people just made my stomach crawl, because I knew that whoever controlled them were sitting there, screaming in a complete panic behind the screen. It just kept going. In Red Dead Redemption 2, I used to have the setting to hear and be heard by everyone enabled, but I had to stop. Naked users came running at me while I was camping out at Strawberry, and I turned off all audio as soon as I saw them. I was shaking as I realized the mute setting didn't work, and I force closed my game. I swear for a few seconds after the executable had closed, I could still hear them. I threw my headphones across the room and walked away from the computer, just holding my head and quivering. I didn't know what to do. I could barely be at my computer. I went back to the Hatchetman Cove Steam forums and just started reporting people. I also reported all videos to YouTube, and I just flagged everything. I know I abused the report system, but things were getting out of hand. I was being harassed. So they took it down. Not just the forums or the videos, but everything. The entire Steam page. Gone, including the community page. I could still see the name Hatchetman Cove in my library at that point, but nothing showed up when I clicked it. YouTube and Steam probably didn't care much and didn't bother to do a review my reports. It was easier to just pull the plug. And for a while that did the trick. I actually got back on CSGO. Then it got worse than ever. Random people started joining our Discord server, just screaming into our ears. No matter how many times we banned them or muted them, they just kept coming back. My friends noticed that as long as I was offline, their voices stayed away. So my server figured I was playing a prank or something. At first they thought it was kind of funny, but the more it happened, the more they were getting frustrated. Some were getting scared and sent me private messages asking me to please, as friends, stop. Today I'm permabanned. I can't even log back onto Discord without getting messages from random accounts begging me to come online and kill them. It has gotten to the point where I've uninstalled pretty much everything. I don't even have Skype. I don't play games anymore, and I don't think I'll be browsing Reddit much longer either, since I've started getting messages here too. Not just here, but on my phone as well. Texts in the middle of the night, random calls from unknown numbers. Last week I found traces of handprints on my kitchen window. Not just one or two, but dozens. A neighbor told me there'd been someone shouting outside my door when I was out buying groceries the other day. I'm considering calling the police, but I don't know what to say. I don't even know if I'm in danger. I can't get the bland face of the blameless out of my head. I dream of her asking me without moving her crinkled old mouth if I want it all to stop, and I say yes. I go to her, dressed as old Sturgis, standing alongside the others with my fishing rod. First, I ask her to end it all, but the others speak louder and she can't hear me. Then I ask again, trying to speak over the others. Soon I find myself screaming. We all scream, louder and louder, begging, pleading, crying for her attention. We all want it to stop, and she refuses to oblige. Instead, she just smiles, holding some sort of beautiful secret behind her pixelated dead eyes. I don't know what it is, but I want it. I'm starting to understand, but at the same time, I'm disgusted. Please, stay away from Hatchet Man Cove.